people in an interview, when you ask them, what are your strengths? Everybody's going to tell you how, what they do well. Well, what are your weaknesses? And you'll hear things like, I've been told that I'm a perfectionist and I just want the best out of everything, or that I work too hard. I mean, it's like, but when I do it, I tell them these will be areas based on what I look at with the place.
Discover Your Spiritual Gifts is a new online Bible study we have created here at Place Ministries to help people discover their spiritual gifts and meditate on how to understand them and see them in their own lives. For almost 30 years, my dad has sat down with thousands of people around the world and heard an overwhelming desire for believers to not just know their gifts, but to understand them. This study is for them. This study is for you, to equip your people and to encourage your people, and to show them how God has been, can be, and will continue to use them through their spiritual gifts.
Hey y'all, welcome to the My Place podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm your host, Mary McSwain, and I'm joined, as I always am, by my dad, Jay McSwain.
And it's great to be with you on this seems like, even though it's the middle of February, it seems like an almost spring day here in Atlanta, but good to be here with you, and a little different studio if you're watching this by YouTube, a little different than our normal studio.
Speaking of February, did you catch the groundhog? I just thought of that. Do we have 6 more weeks of winter?
Has he come out yet? So that tells you I didn't catch him, no.
I think he comes out on February 2nd, or is supposed to come out.
Oh, I didn't.
Maybe we need to look that up to know if this is a pre-spring or if we're experiencing a prolonged winter again.
I'm going for a quick spring, not a prolonged winter.
Me too. Me too. Yesterday was great how warm it was.
Yeah.
And it's just throwing us off because I just don't know. I don't know how to dress. I don't know what to expect from the weather.
Yeah, me too.
You have a basketball game tonight.
Yes, I do.
And tell me again, how long have you been watching them?
This is my 12th year following the Buford Lady Wolves basketball team. And I don't know how many years I've been the number one fan, but I kind of got that distinction a few years ago. So
you have, and you've seen a lot of teams come through the program, and a lot of teams that look probably completely different.
Yeah.
Is that safe to say?
Yes.
What would be your insight in watching the shift of the team dynamics as people graduate, as people have transferred in? Is there anything you've seen? Because there's not many people, at least at a high school level, that could say, I've watched the same program for 12 years, and you've watched countless classes come through. Is there anything that has stood out to you that you've seen over the last 12 years in terms of the team dynamics?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we look at personality all the time, and I sit there on the third row. I don't chat during the game. I watch the game, and I watch attitudes, and I watch how much they cheer for each other, how much they support each other, and I think that's one of the things that I've seen ebbing, flowing through the years, and how many of them really buy into the system of what it takes to compete with that system the way that the coach wants them to compete. So that's one of the big things I see. Obviously, I see different talent. Different teams have different talent levels. Some of them are better outside shooters. Some of them, we've had teams that down low they were better. We always have been good outside, but we've had better teams at times that were better down low. But the thing I really look for is, like when they make a bad play, what's their reaction? When they miss a shot, and as you very well know, playing in there, you better not show your disdain missing a shot. You can show your disdain if you miss on the press, getting to where you need to be. That's really, because that's where you're graded the most. But yeah, those are some of the things.
That's one thing that I have found fascinating, just watching that program in particular. I was a part of it for 3 or 4 years, and now watching it in hindsight, watching people go through the program, the leadership hasn't changed. Mine, give or take 1 or 2 coaches out of 7 or 8 that they typically have. The leadership hasn't changed. The style of play hasn't changed. And yet every couple years, if not every year, the players on the team change. Yeah. And yet their goal has remained the same. Their standards have remained the same. Their style of play has remained the same. And yet there are different roles that people pick up that he puts people in because of the type of players he has on his team each year. And while the overall approach to winning a game, to defense, offense, the full court press, that doesn't change, the way he shifts specific people's roles does. Like if they have a lot of really good outside shooters, the offense and the specific plays that he will run will cater to that, as opposed to if he has someone down low that's really talented and that can control the paint really well, his offense will shift to that. And I think the same could be true of staffs and of team dynamics in church, volunteer teams, whether you work in corporate America or on church staffs, is that your goal doesn't change, but the way that you execute that goal is affected by the people that you have on your team. Yeah. And sometimes in the same way that someone could transfer out of a program or graduate out of it, or a new freshman comes up that's really talented, there's times when your team changes, and there are times when, whether it be a staff, a volunteer team, you have to bring new people onto your staff, onto your team. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is we're going to talk about...
Oh, we're not going to talk about Buford Lady Wolves basketball. Okay.
No, to some people's disappointment and to some people's relief, we are not talking about high school basketball. We are not going to talk about high school basketball the whole time, but it does provide an interesting parallel to what it looks like on a volunteer team, on a staff, of the dynamics of a team and how a leader approaches that, but also what happens and what it's like when you have to bring somebody new onto your team, because that is inevitable. You, at times, somebody will leave, somebody will retire, you grow, and you need to bring somebody new into a role. And you work with a lot of churches doing hiring consulting. You use the PLACE tool as part of your consultation. So you've done a good bit of hiring consultation.
A few hundred, I think.
Probably so, for churches and organizations over the years, even people through the Braves mentorship program that you have with the Braves and with Samford. You've done some consulting there with the people that you've mentored. What type of insight are people typically looking for from your consultation?
So if I work with a church, what they're really looking for, Mary, is should I hire the person or not? I mean, that's what they want to know. And I think to some of them, they're a little disappointed because I don't tell them who to hire. I tell them this is who you're going to hire, and here are going to be their strengths. And I actually get sometimes, if churches let the candidate, if they come on, see what I write, sometimes they get angry with me because I also show them these are their liabilities. In other words, their weaknesses where they're not going to be strong. Because, people in an interview, when you ask them, what are your strengths? Everybody's going to tell you how, what they do well. Well, what are your weaknesses? And you'll hear things like, I've been told that I'm a perfectionist and I just want the best out of everything, or that I work too hard. I mean, it's like, but when I do it, I tell them these will be areas based on what I look at through the PLACE profile and other things that we'll talk about in a few minutes. I look at areas that they're not going to be that strong in, and I want that church, that pastor, that team that is hiring, I want them to know, because all of us have strengths and all of us have things that we can call them liabilities, growth areas, but we all have weaknesses. So that's what they want from me. Should I hire them? What I give them is, this is who you're hiring.
Essentially, you give them insight into the person that they're looking at, not necessarily give them insight into your opinion on what decision they should make.
Yes.
How would you discern if someone was the right, quote unquote, fit for a team?
One of the things that I remind a lot of the pastors, a lot of the teams that I've worked with, is it really comes down to three things, and they're the 3 C's. This isn't original with me. I read it somewhere, but I use it a lot in reminding them: character, competency, and chemistry. And when I'm working with them, I'm mostly trying to help them see the competency part. Obviously, I can't do the chemistry part because they've got to see if there's chemistry. And then the character, that's what you hopefully do when you check people's references. I'm not really even sure that's the best way, because who are you going to put on your reference that's going to say, oh, their character is horrible? But character is something that you're trying to figure out. And, when it comes to your competency, sometimes I'm trying to help them figure out, are they the right person for what that role is and how it blends with the rest of the team. So
that's one thing that I found interesting with some of the research I was doing, because obviously I haven't done all of these consultations you have, but I looked at some other experts' opinions on how to build a healthy team and some of the signs of what some people would call a stuck team, one that wasn't moving forward. And one of the things that they said is that it's so important to build diverse teams so that you're not hiring this homogenous group that doesn't have all of the things you need to fulfill the goals that you're trying to accomplish. And in that diverse team, you're looking for diversity for chemistry, for competency, to bring some of the strengths that your team might not have. But also, one of the overarching themes was that first you have to identify what role that they have to fill. Then you look at the person who might be filling that role. And in your case, you would tell them this is how the person is going to fulfill that role in light of how they're wired. And like I said earlier, you oftentimes use, if not every time, the place tool as a way to evaluate who the person is that they would be getting, and they are the ones that are experts on the role that they're trying to fill. But like any tool, personality assessments, any type of inventory, there are some people at times who are hesitant or resistant to using a tool like that.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you've encountered over the years. How could this tool be a hindrance to a hiring process?
I think this is the biggest one. So like our tool is PLACE, P-L-A-C-E. PLACE is an acronym. P is personality, discovery. L is learning spiritual gifts. A, abilities, awareness. C, connecting passion with ministry. E, experiences of life. We read left to right, right? I mean, I think, is it Chinese that goes right to left?
Maybe Hebrew.
But yeah, Hebrew goes right to left. That's correct. Yeah, smart. But the one element of those 5 that is the most understood is probably personality. And I think one of the real liabilities of it is that we use a word a lot. It gives you tunnel vision. And if you only, and I find this so often, people zero in on one area, and more times than not, just personality. I hate to say this. I know some organizations that use our tool in a hiring, and all they use is the personality part. If you look at my personality, you'll get some things wrong, but I can go ahead and tell you, you'll get a lot of things totally, totally wrong if you don't look at the entire profile. So one of the, I think, real dangers is looking at one area. Another danger, and we talk about this a lot, not understanding the language of how, whether we're right or wrong, how we use things. Like, how do we use the difference between the spiritual gift of helps and the spiritual gift of service? What about the spiritual gift of encouragement, exhortation? We don't use it the way most people. And I think one of the other liabilities is not understanding the language of the tool that you're actually using. And again, the way they answered the statement. So if they're using our spiritual gifts, I'm not saying we're right, but the way that we describe it is the way we put the statements. And if the person hiring has a totally different understanding of what knowledge is versus the way we use it, they're going to make some wrong assumptions about the person. So I think some of that is just not understanding it, or having tunnel vision can be a great hindrance to using a tool like Place.
There are obviously liabilities to using any tool because, like any tool, it's effective when it's used properly. When it's used improperly, it can be very detrimental. But when used properly, it can be very effective in something like a hiring process. So how could using a tool like Place, from what you've seen, actually enhance the hiring process?
Yeah, I actually, you gave me this question and I wrote it down, and I wrote this. It could take me sometimes months and months to gain insights into another person just in a conversation. I sat down last night with one of the most brilliant, licensed counselor therapists that I've met in a long, long time. And I did her coaching session. And we actually went a little bit longer than I normally do. We went about an hour and a half. And at the end of it, she looked at me and she goes, "How do you know so much about me?" Well, I started off with having PLACE, and then as I asked her questions, probably, I don't know, Mary, probably in 55 minutes, I don't think I spoke 3 or 4 minutes. But what I was doing was, and I was looking at what she wanted to accomplish, her purpose. As I was listening and writing, I was looking at the tool to see where she was speaking through the lens of how God has created her. But that gave me so much more insight. Now, the danger part of that too is that you put people in a box, but that's where you got to listen to their story and not just go with all these preconceived ideas, but listen to the story. I want to tell you where I made a mistake in using an inventory in a hiring process. So as you know, I help with a mentoring program with the Atlanta Braves and Sanford University. And the young lady that has been one of my mentorees last year and again this year, she graduates in May, in just a few months. So I have a friend who's a baseball agent, and when I kept talking to this young lady, she had had some other jobs, the Birmingham Barons, I think that's a AA team. There was a hockey team there she worked for. There's an organ, is it called D1? It like does training and all. She had done some work there. I had the Place profile. We were talking about what were good experiences there and what were horrible experiences there. And again, I'm looking at her profile and she's speaking right through the lens of who she is not as to why they were bad experiences. Well, here was the mistake. I connected her with my friend, the agent. I knew what she needed, but I didn't really go to him, and I just connected him and said, "Y'all make the decision." And I knew him well enough to know that he was not going to probably give a lot of direction, and he certainly wasn't going to micromanage. And she needed some boundaries. When I looked at her, she was like that conventional artistic personality or ability type that likes boundaries but wants freedom within the boundary. And what he did is he just left her alone, and she's not going to end up staying with him after college. But as I told her when we met a couple of weeks ago, I said, "Hey, this is all a learning." But you know what I learned in the hiring process is to take into account both the person that is hiring, who they are and will be, versus the person that is being hired. So in that situation, I really feel like I made a mistake in not matching up both the people.
Because the role is sometimes just as important as who the leader is, I would guess. Because even though the role might be described in a certain way, the leader sets the tone for the environment that they create for the person that they're hiring. And when it comes to using a tool like Place, like you were saying, sometimes it's just as important to know who the person is as it is to know who the leader is, to know, is that going to be a good fit? is not just the role that they're going into going to be a good fit, but can the leader lead them in a way that will help them thrive? And in some cases, like, we are very different in how we are wired and how we function, but you as a leader know how to create an environment for me where I will thrive. Some leaders, like in that case, may not just have the capabilities to create that environment for the person that they're hired, therefore it might not be a good fit. But for the leader, from their perspective, as they go through the hiring process, they look at these candidates. Who am I going to bring on my team? In the same way, a coach needs to know the environment where their players will thrive, the communication and the instruction that they receive best, and the skills that they bring to their team so that they can put them in a role on their team where they will thrive. A leader has to know who they're hiring, who they're bringing on their staff and on their team so that they can set the tone. They can coach or lead that player well so that not only the individual will thrive, but the goal of the team will be executed as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
You, again, do a good bit of hiring for churches and organizations around the country. What is typically the type of feedback that you give to the church for them to understand who that person is? Because you don't necessarily tell them whether or not that they should hire them, but you tell them who that person is. So what does that really look like in that conversation?
So I actually, sometimes I only use two things. When it's really done the best and the church wants to really push the person, and it's a little more complicated for me, a little more involved, is I use, and I actually, we're going to put this in the link, these two documents that I pulled up, is I created, I'm dating myself now. I created this about 25 years ago. It's called the Ministry Experience Questionnaire. And they're not yes/no answers, but they're 14 questions. I've had people sometimes give me 5, 6, 7 pages of answers. But they do the Ministry Experience Questionnaire. And then I have them they take the place assessment. They do it online, but they take all of our PLACE assessments. And then I take the printout of their PLACE. And then I take their resume. You'd be shocked sometimes at what you can learn in a resume. And then I take and create what is called the placement analysis report. And I've got one that, again, we're going to put it online, and I just called it, I actually took a real one, and nobody will ever, and called the person John Doe. Okay, so I don't think anybody will ever figure out where this was. The name of the church, I think I called it ABC Church. But I took a real one and actually put it so that churches could look at it. And what I end up doing, like on this one, the Ministry Experience Answers, which is through the questionnaire, one of the things that I put on this one with the place profile in sync. Sometimes, Mary, they're not in sync. And sometimes the way they answer these questions is not in line with what their place profile says. And then a lot of times I'll put some questions for the church or the organization to ask them to see which one is true. Because again, it's a great thing to do when you're looking at 3 different things. And why do I use the resume? Sometimes when people talk about what were their responsibilities, oftentimes they will use their personality to describe what their responsibilities are. And again, I'm looking to see if they're in sync. I'll never forget this one. I remember this was years ago doing this. Conclusion, and I put John, but the real person. John will succeed if. And I wrote a pretty long paragraph there. I also wrote, based on some things that I'd put in here, some face-to-face questions to ask, like, how do you respond when you're told no to something you believe is needed for your ministry to be successful? And I think the bottom line on this one, I think what I remember writing in here, and I had a headline that I think summed it up: reining in a powerful stallion. And I found John's answers to question 1 in the ministry experience questionnaire the most interesting for several reasons, and then I stated them. And then I came back at the end based on my personal history with John and reading because I did an interview, his questions. Question 1, he will be like a powerful stallion who has been let out in the pasture to run as fast as he can without any supervision. This works great until reins are needed, a rider mounted and others around him mount and need to go where the stallion does not want to go as a team. And I wrote a little bit more, but so the answer that you ask is, what do I use? I use the place profile, I use a person's resume, and most of the time, if the church will, I'll use the ministry experience questionnaire. I put it together and I write, it's no computer generated anything. I write about a 7-page report, again, telling them this is who you're going to get.
You know, you brought up a great point of the value of using a tool like this is because when you're in an interview, while you might have a set of questions, sometimes interviews can be very subjective based off of how you hear their answers, and also the person being interviewed can cater their answers towards what you think they ought to hear, but you get to see consistency when you use a more measurable tool like an inventory, like the place assessment, is you get to compare, do they know themselves as well as they think they do in the way that they describe themselves?
Yeah.
And it allows for a more measurable and objective evaluation, because even for how they evaluate themselves, their interview answers are their subjective awareness of themselves, and their inventory answers are a more measurable awareness of themselves.
So can I give you one example? So one of the questions in here is about supervision. And it goes, as a supervision goes, rate your need for direction from a supervisor between 1 and 10, 10 being highest, and explain your answer. And so often they'll rate themselves, but it will not line up with their place profile. So which one is true? And that's where sometimes I'll even provide a follow-up question in the report that I give to ask them to say, hey, delve a little bit deeper, because they're saying one thing in their answer to this particular supervision question, but their place profile says something different about them. And sometimes I find they don't have a very good awareness of themselves.
And that could be invaluable information in somebody's hiring process and evaluation of a person. Now, not everybody listening to this is going to be in that position where they're trying to figure out how to hire someone and how to bring someone on their team. However, there's a lot of people listening to this that might be considering whether they would be a good fit on a team that they're considering, because in the same way that someone is considering to hire you, oftentimes you're considering whether or not you want to be hired by somebody else. So for the individual considering whether or not they want to be a part of a team, how could they discern whether or not they would be a good fit with the information that they have?
So, Mary, in about 6 weeks, you and I will be at Moody Bible Institute, and we will be sitting down with students one-on-one. And many of them are getting to the end of their college career. And we're sitting there coaching them through the place profile, and a lot of them are wanting to know how that profile can help them figure out where to go, right? I've been doing this. I think this is maybe my 18th, 19th year going to Moody and doing this and taking people with me to do the coaching. And what I try to help, and I do this more than just at Moody, but what I try to help, I'll say those students do, is while you're interviewing for a job, you're also it's the other side too. You're interviewing an employer to whether or not you would want to go there. And I will never forget, this was several years ago, and we have to be real careful what we say to them. But one of our team members sat down with a young man. It was the end of April, maybe the beginning of May. He was graduating in a month. And he had taken a job as a youth minister at a church out of the state somewhere. Well, the pastor was coming in the next day just to go over some, little dot all the I's, cross all the T's, how much you can get paid, and all your all that stuff. But it was a done deal. The young man had said yes. The church had said yes. Well, our teammate, as they were going over the place profile, he was artistic and liked to develop and create as his passion. I mean, he was not in a box at all. And so our teammate said, hey, one of the things that you might want to ask is when you go there, are they going to allow you to create some vision, create some direction for the student ministry? Or when you look at the passion demonstrations, which he had at the very bottom, these manage, organize, improve, and perfect. Which one were they looking for him to bring some of his ideas and his vision, or just manage, organize, improve, and perfect what was already there? And so the young man asked the pastor, which one? And the pastor said, oh, we don't need anything. We have the best student ministry there is. We just want you to manage it and improve what we've already got. No, we're not looking for any new vision and direction. And unfortunately, the young man, we had to work on this one. The young man said, well, I don't think I'm the right person. And the next day in class, and everybody knew he was going to this church. The next day when we were teaching in the class and we said, hey, tell about some of your coaching sessions. He tells the class, I was going to that church and I told them yesterday after, I learned this about myself, I'm not a right fit for them. So now we have to be a little more cautious when somebody's at the end of it. But it would be good to know on the beginning of it, if you know who you are, then you can ask questions, not in like you're interrogating them, but in ways about what do you see some of the tasks, what do you see some of the skill sets that need to, and the whole time, if you know the place profile and what it means, you're sitting there listening. Are they asking you to fulfill who you are or something that you would not be? So I think knowing yourself and knowing how to even use it in an interview process, or even before the process, when you look at the job description, sometimes it'll give you a great idea of what type of person is going to be needed. And again, you can be saying a youth minister, you can say, I love kids, but what type role are they going to want you to fulfill in there? So
that in and of itself could be a whole nother conversation that we don't have time for today, but we might be able to pick back up another time. But whether you are someone that is looking to bring more people on your team and you don't feel like you have the measurable tools that you need to build the team that you have in mind, Place is a great resource as you continue to build your team to give you some of those measurable, objective ways to evaluate someone in addition to just interviewing them, both of which can give you a better picture of who that person is. And if you're the individual that just wants more language to be able to ask some of the right questions to evaluate opportunities that someone, organizations, churches, the Lord is putting before you, Place is a great starting point to begin to give you some of that language for you to articulate yourself, but also give you some clarity on the questions that you need to ask as you search for the place that you would thrive in, that you would be the most effective and fulfilled in. Place is a tool. It's one of the many tools that you can put in your toolbox to help you find people to put on your team or discern whether or not you would be a good fit as you look to join the teams that are presented to you. As always, thank you again for joining us, and make sure to tune back in for next week's episode.